Thank you for joining us today for Calibre Leadership Systems' first in a series of webinars on dysfunctional leadership styles, how you know you are working with a narcissistic leader. Over our 25 plus years of working closely with executive teams and individual leaders on behavioral change, leadership, and organizational development, combined with our research on personality styles, neuroscience, and the emotional drivers of behavior, we have come to identify 5 distinct dysfunctional leadership styles. Each has its own challenges as well as path towards development. Each represents a different negative impact on the organizations in which they lead, impacts that can often lead to dysfunction within the organization or even just a failure to achieve the potential of the organization. We chose to start with the narcissistic leader as their impact is felt strongly by those who work with them. Firstly, you want to decide if it's a narcissistic leader that you're working with. I will cover off the 6 signs that you are, in fact, working with a narcissistic leader. In parts 2 and 3 of the webinar, we will provide you with tips on how to survive, as well as how to coach their development if you find yourself working to change their impact as leaders. It is our hope when you have completed our 3 webinars on narcissistic leaders, you will be able to identify them by their behavior and by their impact, know how to deal with them personally to minimize the impact that they have on you directly, and also understand fully what it takes to actually change their behavior. They bring great strengths to our organizations, so shifting them out of their dysfunctional behavioral patterns is key to getting the most from these leaders. So before we get into the 6 signs of how you know you are working for a narcissistic leader, I want to talk a little bit about the characteristics overall of this dysfunctional leadership type. Now, there's a lot of confusion about the differences between people who are narcissistic versus those who have a narcissistic personality disorder. According to the Mayo Clinic, narcissistic personality disorder is a mental disorder in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance and a deep need for admiration. Those with narcissistic personality disorder believe that they're superior to others and have little regard for other people's feelings. But behind this mask of ultra-confidence lies a fragile self-esteem, vulnerable to the slightest criticism. The narcissistic leader that we're talking about, on the other hand, is not mentally ill. They do not have a personality disorder. They are most interested in gaining power, money, and prestige. They may act the same and seem almost indistinguishable to those with an actual personality disorder for most people. However, their self-esteem is not as fragile, and they are actually able to develop new behaviors. Now, they seem the same because they use the same dysfunctional behaviors in order to achieve their agenda. Narcissistic leaders are able competitors who love getting to the top and staying there. They are able to visualize themselves as the best or most accomplished in their field. They can energetically sell themselves and their ideas, their projects. They are shrewd in dealing with others, utilizing the strengths and advantages of others to achieve their own goals. However, on the flip side, narcissistic leaders are arrogant and obnoxious and act as though they are superior to others. They exploit others to gain what they want and have no qualms about doing this. With little capacity for reflection, their self-awareness is low. They rarely apologize, as they have no insight into what they do and feel little shame or remorse for their actions. The narcissistic leader reacts to criticism with feelings of rage, stress, or humiliation, even if they're not expressed. They are interpersonally exploitive, always taking advantage of others to achieve their own ends. Narcissistic leaders lack empathy and are unable to recognize and experience how others feel. They are often preoccupied with feelings of envy as they want what it is that others have. However, a key characteristic of narcissistic leaders that it is important to always remember is that they are able to develop new behaviors. This is important to always keep in mind because while it may be challenging for them to do so, and certainly it takes work for those of us that are supporting their development, it is possible. So the first sign that you are working for a narcissistic leader is that you walk on eggshells around them. So consider this. Do you wonder what mood your boss is in before you approach them? Do you find yourself spending a lot of time figuring out the best way to spin something for your boss in order to manage his or her reaction to the information? One of the ways we know we are working for a narcissistic leader is that we find ourselves walking on eggshells around them all the time. Their moods and behavior swing back and forth, leaving you uncertain as to who it is that's actually going to show up. I have one client who's a narcissistic leader whose mood we can feel before she even walks into the room and opens her mouth. And what happens is you can watch the rest of the team shift their behavior depending on how she is leading herself into the room with that emotion. They're always trying to find ways to work around her and avoid dealing with her. They really don't want to have to take on the emotions and inappropriate behavior that emerges when she is confronted in any particular way. Now, narcissistic leaders are not above using their emotions to intimidate and manipulate to get their way. Recently, I was sharing the results of an employee feedback process with a client. Some of the feedback was unfavorable about him. As we started the discussion, he was charismatic, charming, welcoming, talking about how much he was looking forward to what it was that I had to share with him. As soon as I started to share the feedback, his whole demeanor changed in a heartbeat. He was suddenly leaning forward towards me, his voice raised, finger pointing, accusing me of making it all up or taking what one person had said and making it sound like it was coming from everyone. Now, I found myself wanting to physically withdraw and defend my credibility, which of course was his intent. Shifting it, using his emotions to intimidate me. So I had to consciously lean forward to him and simply respond without engaging in the battle. I had to deflate it. Of course, in the back of my mind, the whole time I was thinking I got to experience exactly what it was employees were talking about firsthand. So cue number one, moods and behavior of the narcissistic leader swing back and forth from charming to rageful or vindictive, causing you to tread carefully and walk on eggshells around them. Now, the impact of this behavior, of course, is quite significant on the people around them. It creates a culture of fear and anxiety. Employees are unable to do their best work and often opt not to bring issues or ideas forward for fear of unleashing the beast within. Going back to my example of the leader that I was sharing feedback with, a lot of his employees talked about the fact that there is very much a fear of the shoot the messenger syndrome in that organization. And so even though there was an issue, it was just best to ignore the issues that were going on inside of the organization than have to deal with this particular narcissistic leader. The next cue that you're working with a narcissistic leader is that you are an object. So what does this mean? Well, when you work with a narcissistic leader, the bottom line is that it is all about them. Your purpose to the narcissistic leader is simply to mirror back their inflated self-image. They don't invest any energy in developing employees as they can't see past their own agenda, and the goal is to use people while keeping themselves feeling superior at all times. In order for them to be strong, Someone has to be weak. This dysfunctional leadership style is known for choosing people with low self-esteem and then taking advantage of them. They will criticize, humiliate, or embarrass others in public with demeaning jokes or comments. Employees end up feeling invisible and devalued. Often it can be tough to recognize that you are caught in this dynamic with a narcissistic leader. I recently observed an exchange between a CEO client of mine and his long-term principal auditor, who just recently started up his own business. "What's the name of your company?" my client asked. The auditor shared the name. "Well," said the CEO, "that's a stupid name for a company. Why would you name it that?" Of course, as anyone would, the auditor attempted to defend the name choice. But despite the joking behind the discussion that the CEO tried to put into it, the damage was done. It showed the CEO as being superior and devalued the auditor in order to inflate the CEO's self-esteem. This same client is a great example of the impact that this behavior has on the organization. When your focus is on exploiting people and not wanting to feel threatened by the competence of others, you don't hire competent people to work for you. As a result, there is a lack of bench strength and the organization struggles to grow and perform given the inexperience of the people below the narcissistic leader. In the case of my CEO client, the company has stalled out as he has not put in place an experienced leadership team to run the operations. His next level managers end up working long hours to compensate for their lack of development and experience. But no matter how hard they try, they are always to blame for the problems in the company. The narcissistic leader has a gift for seducing people into believing they are friends and on solid ground in the relationship. They will act like you are special when they need you. As an employee, it is exciting to receive the attention of the narcissistic leader and to be part of his or her inner circle. You can actually start to believe that this gives you the ability to be honest and direct with the narcissistic leader, even talking to them as though they are your friend. But the third cue that you are working for a narcissistic leader is that you are not as special as you think. One head of HR that is a longtime client of ours had an experience with her CEO boss, who clearly fits the profile of a narcissistic leader. The two of them had worked closely together for about 18 months, as she handled his complaints about his direct reports, dealt with difficult situations for him so that he didn't have to, and even was aware of things going on in his personal life that others were not. He gave her time and attention, while others on the executive team complained about being ignored by the leader. They had a great rapport, and she felt confident in her relationship with him. However, this changed the moment she addressed with him that some of his behavior was the cause of dysfunction within the executive team, and that his habit of picking one person on the team to blame for the issues, firing them, and moving on to scapegoat another was not helping the business. She was effectively thrown out from that point on. He avoided her, refused to meet with her, and ultimately she proposed her own exit from the firm. While she handled the situation gracefully, others having similar experiences with the CEO did not, and found themselves having their reputations damaged and the recovery for themselves in their career very challenging. With the narcissistic leader, you become quickly aware that you only exist when they need something from you, and that what you are feeling or experiencing is actually irrelevant to the relationship with them. Their lack of empathy means that they fail to see how they treat others and really don't care about those feelings. I listened to a recent exchange between two executive team members, both of whom are narcissistic leaders. Let's call them Sue and Will. Will recently joined the organization, taking over responsibilities that used to fall under Sue's control. Sue expected Will to defer to her expertise and come to her for direction on what he was doing, even though he doesn't report to her. She refused to reach out to him in order to share her knowledge. Will's perspective was that he knew what he was doing and so didn't need anything from her. After all, he was hired in for his expertise. Sue complained that he was being dismissive and devaluing her. Will didn't see what the issue was, as he had a job to do. He acknowledged that he forgets that other people exist and that he needs to stay connected with them. I use this example as both of them couldn't see how the other was feeling, nor did they really care. The focus, as it always is with narcissistic leaders, is on their own agenda, regardless of how other feels. Sue was not concerned with what it was that Will was feeling coming into the new organization and working to support him. She was only concerned about whether or not he was reflecting back and making her feel superior. On the flip side, Will, acknowledging fully, I forget people exist. I don't really know that they're there because if I don't need them, then I just need to get on with the business at hand. As a result, when we've got individuals that are individual narcissistic leaders that are focused so much on their own agenda and not considering the impact on the people, then what happens is that you're included if you're useful to that agenda, but otherwise you don't exist. So what's the impact? As a result, what we see happening is resentment, and employees become passive-aggressive in dealing with the narcissistic leader, as is the case with Sue. So she took the position of, well, he needs to come to me, I don't need to go to him. And so rather than working in the best interest of the organization, each of them are driving it around their own agenda. So the other thing that happens is we watch employees who work for narcissistic leaders really, because they are so fearful of the reaction and what the narcissistic leader might do to them, they actually allow themselves to be used, yelled at, and otherwise humiliated. And they stay with the narcissistic leader in order to keep trying to show that they actually do matter. The reality is that good people are rarely suspicious of the behavior of others. As a result, they cannot imagine other people doing the things that they themselves are incapable of doing. So when their narcissistic peers or boss constantly throw them under the bus when something goes wrong, in order to deflect any blame or responsibility for themselves, the person left picking themselves up is often shocked by what just happened. A few years ago, I started working with an executive team, and this was one of their favorite phrases. They all accused each other of throwing them under the bus, and they also talked about their direct reports doing the same to peers and other areas of the business, often in front of their clients, as a result of their own behavior at the executive level. One of the team in particular was constantly doing this to her teammates. As I observed the dynamics in the group, I could see that it would happen any time she was asked a question about something she was accountable for. One conversation in particular went like this. Okay, Lisa, can you tell us where you're at with the launch of the new website design and whether it's back on track? Her response: my team is totally behind getting out the proposals for our clients as Glenn's team hasn't given me the numbers I need. Glenn, what's the problem as your team knew the deadlines we were working to? See the deflection? So poor Glenn not only was blindsided, but shifted to defend his team despite really not having any details in that meeting. The rest of the leadership group just sat back in stunned silence. Turns out, the website was yet again going to miss the launch deadline, but the team never got this information as it moved on to the next item on the list after Lisa threw Glenn under the bus. One of my favorite lines that captures this aspect of the narcissistic leader is, everything would be great if you would just expect less of me. So really their non-performance is my fault as my expectations are too high. So the impact of this behavior on any team is that it breaks trust. It builds resentment between team members and ultimately creates silos in the organization. They fracture the cohesiveness on the team and cause people to take sides of them around them, take the sides around them, as I showed you with the example of the executive team that I was working with, where people shift as a result of being thrown under the bus by this behavior. It's really tough to build alignment around organizational or team objectives when you have a narcissistic driving their own agenda and reflecting responsibility or deflecting responsibility for their area. Because they need to win, they create power struggles with team members or the team leader. They're disruptive during meetings. They may even show up late, discount, and really ultimately they are slighted. And so using their emotions, which is what throwing people under the bus is all about, is really about driving further conflict on the team so they can be untouched in the process. So finally, our last clue that you are working for a narcissistic leader is that you are never right. This might be the easiest one to catch because it doesn't matter the topic, the situation, your expertise, or even the leader's expertise. It's simple. You're just never right. A client of mine, a long-time HR VP, recently went through the experience of getting a new boss who was brought into a fast-growing company as a COO. He had never been a COO before, nor did he have any experience in their particular industry. In fact, he really didn't have much that would recommend him for this job, except he convinced the CEO entrepreneur to give it to him. So here we are about 6 months into the role, and significant issues have begun to emerge, and turnover in the company has skyrocketed. Ratings on Glassdoor, which had historically always been positive, now were increasingly negative. As the VP HR, my client presented options as to how to deal with what was happening while keeping it objective, so as not to infer blame on the new COO. Each time, he told her there was no issue, she was overreacting and being too emotional, and that he knew how to handle the situation better than she did. In fact, he argued with her on everything from the purpose of the HR function and would constantly ask her questions to prove her expertise that really had nothing to do with the actual business needs, almost as though she were being tested in an academic environment. He would tell her how to do her job. He would tell her what the right answers were that she should be giving him. All of this behavior was to put her in her place. Today, this COO has lost 75% of the leadership team that was in place when he took on the role. In each case, he is refusing to bring in experienced candidates, choosing instead to downgrade roles from VP to director. The limited capacity of the narcissistic leader for sharing the limelight causes them to devalue others to ensure their place at the top. They want to be king or queen of the castle. They want to always be right. So they ensure their domain allows this to happen. Driven by the belief that their way is the better way, this leader does their own thing at the expense of the organization and organizational alignment. As with all the other dysfunctional self-protective behaviors of the narcissistic leader, this creates organizational silos and it forces competent, confident people to leave the organization at great cost of the business. And of course, my HR client is now residing in a new organization where she can actually bring her expertise to the table and have her be valued and be listened to in the role, given the great expertise she brings to the organization. I hope you found this session informative and clarified for you how to determine if you are working with a narcissistic leader. The impact of their dysfunctional self-protective behaviors are profound, and we have seen many an example of organizations that have imploded as a result of the narcissistic leader at its helm. Want to learn more? Check out our webinar on how to survive the narcissistic leader, in which we give you specific strategies for keeping your confidence intact, as well as how to change the behavior of our narcissistic leaders. Thank you for your interest. At Caliber, we specialize in helping individuals and organizations to achieve their potential through our customized approaches to development and organizational effectiveness. We look forward to your feedback and hope you will return to check out our other webinars and articles or sign up for some of our live events. Thanks again.